Welcome to another episode of Property Particulars Podcast, which is the podcast from residential property here at Lester Aldridge and the part of the wider private wealth team. And today, my guest is Giuseppe Pingerna. Hello.
Hello.
How are you today?
I'm good.
Good. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming all the way up from Bournemouth.
Thank you.
And so to begin with, just a little bit about you. So Giuseppe, how long have you been with Lester Aldridge, and what's your journey to, which team are you in, so that we all know?
So I joined the firm in May 22.
Okay.
I relocated from Cambridgeshire a little bit before then, so I had a stint at another firm. And I'm in the family team, so I am a family lawyer.
Okay. And so the family team is part of our wider private wealth team.
It is.
And we have family teams in both Bournemouth and Bournemouth and London.
Correct.
Yes,
yeah.
but you're part, and you kind of work between the both, because that's how I know you quite well as well, because you come up to London office.
We try and frequent all three offices.
Yeah.
And I enjoy that,
Yeah.
But I'm predominantly based in Bournemouth, but we'll always, happy to travel for our clients.
And how long have you been a lawyer?
Oh, God, it's now been 11 years.
Wow, okay.
Post-qualification. It's always been family law.
Yeah.
I don't know where the time's gone, but it has been 11 years, yeah.
And so did you come into, when you were doing your training contract, did you always want to be a family lawyer? Or did you go into a seat and then go, this is the one for me?
It's an interesting one. My view was I kind of finished uni during that recession.
Okay.
2008, so it was really tough with training contracts. And my dream was, go back to Cambridgeshire, have a stint with my mum and dad in terms of, because I'm absolutely skint as a student, and then do my training contract applications, be a commercial lawyer in London. Then the recession happened, and I was working in insurance, and all that went out the window, and I found this paralegal job in the sticks in Cambridgeshire.
Okay.
And that was for a family team, and it was stripped back family law. And that's really where it went from, really.
There's so many of it, because I started as paralegal as well. There's so many of us that did that route. And, they're still doing it now. The paralegals that come into Lester Aldridge now start in that route and then kind of hopefully get training contracts and move forward like that. But it's quite interesting that we've all kind of had this a similar route.
Yeah.
And so you've been with us 2.5-ish years. And what's your title here at Lester Aldridge?
So senior associate.
Yeah. Okay, cool. And how big is your family team?
So it is now. So we've got 5 fee earners. I hope I've got that right, actually. Yeah, 5 fee earners, but it's growing as well. 5 or 6. No,
that's all right.
Yes, I think that's where we're at. But we are growing, and that's a really good thing for us and Lester Aldridge.
Exactly. And on that note, you've got a new lawyer coming into the team soon, because Alice is qualifying into.
Yes.
Yeah, or maybe we'll have already by the time this podcast is
released. Yeah. No, and I'm looking forward. We are all looking forward to Alice joining.
Personally, I'm a little bit annoyed, obviously, because I wanted Alice to come and have a job with me in residential property, but her dream was always to qualify as a family lawyer.
She has always been very passionate about it, even though I saw the double app with the two of you.
Yeah.
But family law, and it's great to see that.
Yeah.
Because for us, I think family, it's quite popular with trainees.
Yes.
But I think you do have to. I think you have to have the passion for it to go into it.
Yeah.
If you don't have that, it's one of those particular areas, I think. And I think, it's great. It's just nice to see young blood and new blood coming into it.
Definitely. And so we have a bit of crossover between our teams, because family is part of the wider private wealth group. Yes. So we have family, residential property, TTW, tax trusts and wills. And so, to kind of maybe switch on to a bit more of a legal question. The question that I have quite often, where I have a bit more interaction with you and your team, is I'll have, say, a couple buying a property. They are unmarried. And so the first thing normally that pops into my head at that stage is, how much money are they both putting in, and do I need to refer them to our tax and trust team for maybe a declaration of trust? But then quite often, and more so nowadays, is that they will ask me for some kind of, what agreement can we have which will document how we own the property jointly together during the whole ownership. So not just at the point of purchase, which is kind of the declaration of trust bit. And so that's then when we would come to your team.
Yes.
And so how can you help us in that respect?
Well, it's great. So the agreement we're looking for there is a cohabitation agreement. And it's interesting you should say this, because I think we're probably seeing more and more of those agreements, because have to say marriage is not always on the table these days. And why should it be? It's, you know, it's a personal preference, and I think the law needs to catch up. But what we've got to realise, and a big misconception, and I will start with this, is that common law, husband and wife, does not exist. And being married and not being married are two separate sets of rules, really, when it comes to the law. So what a cohabitation agreement does give you is protection, both financial protection and the day-to-day protection in terms of the property arrangements. Okay, so, you know, that could be, as you've rightly said, we could mirror what's in the Declaration of Trust in that cohabitation agreement. But also, you could have a couple where if say, one of them owns that property outright and one of them doesn't, but is living there could be an arrangement in terms of the one who doesn't own the property could be given the one that does own the property, I don't know, £1,000 a month towards the utility bills, or maybe that is towards the mortgage.
Sure.
But the interesting point there is that latter point, towards the mortgage. If we do not resolve that scenario, the one who does not own that property could later claim a beneficial interest, saying, look, I contributed 10 years, you know, that £600 of the £1,000 was actually helping you pay the mortgage. I own, you know, in terms of what is here, I have a beneficial interest in that property. Now, what a cohab agreement can do is iron that out, essentially. And that's just one of many examples of what, there's more, you know, what we can place in a cohabitation agreement.
Sure, yeah, because we quite often get all those questions. So a couple will come along and they're asking me, can we detail this, this, and this, and then I immediately am out of my depth as a property lawyer, and then we pass them over to you to get a bit more assistance.
Sure.
Because as you say, there's so many different arrangements on how people buy and live together. Nowadays, we see it all.
We do that. And a really interesting one I've had in recent time, probably a year ago now, is artwork. So one of the parties came into it by owning the property, and then, so in this case, I was acting for one of them, of course, because we can only act for one. And then the other should go and get their own independent legal advice.
Of course.
But the other person, i.e. not my client, came in with quite a lot of artwork. So that got recorded in the cohab agreement.
Interesting.
And you get all sorts of kind of, you know, anomalies or, you know, niche points like that can be recorded.
And they can all be recorded in that agreement.
Absolutely.
Yeah, okay, great. And so, like, one of the other things, other points that I come quite often to your team is that I can quite often be acting for a couple that are maybe divorcing. And quite often it might be amicable, it might not be, but they jointly have instructed me to sell a property. And I make it very clear at that outset that, you know, I'm acting for both of you jointly. So if there's any dispute, it might mean that I have to stop acting for both of you. And in all the ones I've done today, it's always normally quite amicable at that stage because they've got a common purpose they want to sell. But sometimes I'll get to see the court decree, or and it can be quite detailed, especially if a couple have owned maybe 4 or 5 properties in a portfolio and they're selling them all off, or they've got to sell a couple, and then at that point it triggers some other one being transferred. So quite often I'll come just a bit more of for a favour in understanding that document.
Yes, absolutely. So what and that's correct. And what you're referring to is a financial order, or indeed, it's also known as a consent order as well. So that, if it's agreed by consent, it's known as a consent order, but the umbrella term is a financial order. And that's crucial because you, as a resi lawyer, ultimately, Doug, if you've got two parties there who are not on the same page, quite literally, there's very little you can do, even if you could act for one of them or both. In that case, it would be both. But there's very little you can do if they're coming at you with different instructions. You will need to see really a financial order, that really points out, there'll be various clauses in there. If there's more than, especially if there's X amount of properties, which are being either transferred or, whatever it be, it needs to be recorded in that financial order. Interestingly, though, if we have a scenario where, and I've had it in the past with your team down in Bournemouth, if there's not a financial order because perhaps the parties have separated, but they're not ready for divorce. One thing that could be considered, but they have to consider this, is a separation agreement as well. And eventually when they do divorce, they will need that financial order. But a separation agreement can be almost an interim position.
I've seen a couple of them come through now as well.
Yes, and they're important because, again, for you as a resi lawyer, if you're dealing with all of that, you can't have two different instructions going on.
No, exactly. And this kind of shows a bit that we have clients that we refer both ways, don't we? In this scenario. So sometimes I've even had clients that might have separated, but that's happened quite a while ago, and then the selling of the property is doing a bit of catch up. And then sometimes I've actually said to clients at that point, if there is any dispute now, a year or two later on this court order settlement agreement, then if you need some extra advice, then I'll refer them back. So it kind of works. We do a lot of referral work between our teams, don't we?
Absolutely, and that's the benefit of having us being part of the wider team.
Exactly.
It's great to have that because we know that our clients, potentially I could have a divorcing client who then needs to sell their matrimonial home. But then somewhere in between that, they may need a will.
Or to update.
Definitely
the will. Update the will.
And we cover all of that, don't we, in our team? And it's really good that we can look after them in that sense.
Yeah, exactly. Well, thank you for that. Some good advice there. So we'll switch from maybe some legal points to a bit more fun stuff. So as the podcast is called Property Particulars, what about you, Giuseppe? Have you got your own property particulars? Have you bought and sold property before? Was that stressful? Tell me a bit about that.
Well, it's quite interesting. Was it stressful? It was an interesting time. Though. I was living in Cambridgeshire. My wife and I decided to relocate to Bournemouth. And then we put a bid in on a property, which we thought, this will, we like it. I hadn't seen the house. My wife had gone up, so I absolutely trusted her with this one.
Of course.
So anyway, eventually, let's fast forward. All got accepted. We were at completion stage, and that completion stage happened to be March 2020. The big bad C word. And Boris had just done his thing.
And so we were locked down.
We were locked down.
About to be.
I think if we're honestly, and this is absolutely spontaneous, but I think we're talking any time between the 18th and 21st of March, we were completing. And we did end up completing. We got it over the line. However, we couldn't pick up our keys until July that year, I believe. So my in-laws ended up, they were living...
So you were locked down in Cambridge and couldn't physically move.
No, we couldn't physically move. But ironically, we probably were not, we were in a rental, but we were not ready to move. But we didn't want to wait until July. But no one envisaged there'd be this global pandemic.
It was it's so interesting that you moved in that time. I have so many clients. Actually, even now, I've got some clients coming back to me selling 3 or 4 years later. And I bought their house for them during that period when we all thought, actually, for us in the Resi team, that we thought the work would stop.
Yeah.
But it paused for a short while, and then it went, because I don't think we didn't have much to do at home. So people, and it was such great weather, if you remember, when we came into that April, May time, and people, when they opened up and allowed estate agents to go back to work, it was our busiest time, to be honest.
It was, because you had that cluster, didn't
Yeah.
you? But I was going to say that, interestingly, we didn't end up moving actually until the October.
Wow.
So, and we bought a bit of a doer-upper. So we ended up using that time, because we couldn't holiday anywhere. We bought a hot tub, and we ended up just treating we were renting and then going down to Bournemouth when we could. Just as in a derelict. But the big one for me is that Lester Aldridge, who I'd never heard of, dealt with my conveyancing.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So before you joined us.
Absolutely before.
So I presume that was then a referral from the estate agent locally, I suspect.
The estate agent had very kind words for this little-known company to me called Lester Aldridge, and it was dealt with brilliantly. And
That's
I'm not
amazing.
Just saying that.
That's actually quite a cool story that we acted for you before you then came and joined us.
Yes. So when I had my interview, I then emailed the guys in the Resi team who ended up, who were dealing with my conveyancing, and I said, "Oh, I've got an interview with you guys." Yeah, but that was, months later.
That's a cool story.
Yeah.
Oh, cool. All right, thank you for that. And then to finish up with, I thought I'm going to trial in this new current episodes of Property Particulars. I'm going to ask you a couple of quick fire questions, if you don't mind. So, what is the best thing about your job now?
The best thing about my job, I think it's always been the case that I gravitate towards children matters in terms of that's what we refer to them. And if I have a parent who desperately wants to see their child, but something's gone wrong because they're either divorcing or, and it's gone very toxic, having that reunion, being able to help during that's
special.
That is very special. Yeah. And equally, because I think children are, the most important part of all that process. They should always come first.
Yeah.
But equally, when it comes to divorce, and the two may go hand in hand, by the way, finally, completing it, giving someone almost, I say this in a very humble sense, but given that you feel like you've been part of giving them a future because they're divorced, it's now the new time in their life.
New chapter.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, exactly. I understand that.
And absolutely that, I think you have to have that in you as a family lawyer because that's moving someone on or being part of that process where we've settled X, Y, and Z. The children matters are resolved, and these parties, and then my client can move on. Okay. That's really nice.
Lovely. Yeah, nice. Okay, next one. What is the best thing about where you live?
Oh, the beach. It has to be. Yeah.
Yeah.
That was part of. My wife was, and she did move up to Cambridgeshire for a bit, which was lovely. And my heart's still partly in Cambridgeshire, but I am very much settled down in Bournemouth because the selling point was I can walk to the beach in 20 minutes. Yeah.
All right, next one, which might be the same answer, but let's see if you give the same answer. Where would be the best place you would go for locally for a walk, either on a sunny or a good winter's day?
Yeah, no, good question. So we live quite near, I suppose it's a suburb called Southbourne, otherwise known as Sobo to the locals. To the locals.
Yes.
And ultimately, we would walk there. What you got there is a really nice, what's called Southbourne Grove.
Okay.
Lots of nice cafes, and you can do that, and then loads of nice eateries down there. Ooh. And then you follow that on, and the beach is right there. You turn right in the beach.
Well, there we go. The fact you mentioned that leads straight into my last question. Like, what would be your favourite, pub, coffee shop, or restaurant?
Oh, okay. I love in Sobo. There's a lovely kind of Spanishy tapasy place called Chef Carlos. There's loads of lovely places there, but I think at the minute that's my flavour of the month.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Good really stuff. Good. Amazing. Giuseppe, thank you so much for joining us on today's episode of Property Particulars podcast.
Thank you.
And catch us soon for another episode. And please do check out our social channels, which is Instagram at Lester Aldridge Property. And the podcasts are on YouTube and Spotify.